Welcome to another episode of the Healing Lyme Summit. I'm Dr. Mariah Hinchy, and tonight I have the pleasure of talking with Dr. Bill Rawls about how Lyme and tick-borne diseases affect our microbiome and gut health. Welcome, Dr. Rawls.
Oh, thank
Um,
you. It's a pleasure.
Great to have you here. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you fell into treating chronic tick-borne diseases.
Yeah, fell in is right on spot. I don't think most people choose that. It chooses them. And I was trained conventionally. I chose to practice obstetrics and gynecology because it dealt more with wellness and bringing life into the world. It was really wonderful, but it came with this obligation of covering hospital, labor and delivery, and emergency room. And in a small town, that was every second to third night. And so I spent 20 years of my life mostly sleep deprived because when you have that kind of call obligation that keeps you up most nights when you're on call, and then trying to balance that with being active in community and being a good dad and husband, it's just those things get shorted along with all your other health habits. And by age 47, I crashed. But just stopping obstetrics and risk and taking more time to sleep didn't fix me. I had just a range of symptoms: cardiac symptoms, gut symptoms, brain symptoms, joint symptoms. My whole body was falling apart. The conventional specialist I saw really couldn't explain it. The most they could give me was a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, which really doesn't get you anything but treatment of symptoms. And I just kept thinking, it's got to be something else, and kept pushing until I finally found that I was carrying the Lyme microbe Borrelia. And then I thought, this is it. I can take antibiotics, I can get well, I'll be back on my feet. But I didn't have acute symptoms. I had chronic symptoms. And I've come to appreciate that what we define as chronic Lyme disease is very, very different than acute Lyme disease. And it doesn't respond well to the types of antibiotics we was in a situation where I really couldn't travel to pursue care and ended up using herbal therapy and got my life back. Not just like a little bottle of herbs off the shelf at the grocery store. I was ordering specialized botanical extracts and taking just handfuls of herbs and gradually got my life back. And over a 5-year period, a big learning experience, all my symptoms gradually melted away. And I've been well ever since. And my life's pursuit since that time has been really understanding why the herbs work and what this thing is that we call chronic Lyme disease.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. And thank God you got better because I know you are helping thousands and thousands of people recover in the same way that you did.
Well, like so many others, like you, we give back, and that's you take what you learn and you try to make it available to anyone else that might be able to benefit.
Yeah. And that's the whole point of what we're trying to do here. So thank you. All right. So let's start. Let's talk about what impacts Lyme disease has on our gut health and microbiome.
Yeah, well, when we say that word microbiome, a lot of people immediately think about the gut. But microbiome is basically all of the microbes that inhabit your body or a part of your body. And we have to respect that, our gut is walled off from all the rest of our tissues. The gut lining keeps the food and microbes contained. So they're active in there, but they're often active independently of us. Our skin microbiome. So we have different microbiomes in the body. We have our gut microbiome, skin microbiome, a microbiome of our sinuses and nasal passages. And all of these microbes are different. I mean, there's even evidence that the microbes you have in your left armpit are different than the microbes you have in your right armpit, which is really interesting. But
Mhm.
all of these things are outside of our tissues. And what my interest has been is what is being defined is the tissue and blood microbiome, that we actually have microbes that slip across these barriers, across the gut, across the skin, across the sinuses, enter the bloodstream, along with all the other foreign things we pick up, like tick-borne microbes and respiratory infections, anything that makes it to the bloodstream. And this is constantly happening. And it turns out that our bloodstream for microbes is more like a freeway than this sterile, calm place. Microbes are constantly coming and going. And of course, the immune system has to manage all of that. But some of those things slip by and end up in our tissues, our brain, our
Mhm.
heart, our joints, everywhere. And it's not just one microbe. It's, what they're finding is that we have microbes throughout our body. If we are healthy, if our cells are healthy, then these things can stay dormant and they can stay dormant for a lifetime. It's only when they become reactivated that we have symptoms. So the gut microbiome is feeding that, and other parts, the other microbiomes in the body are feeding that. So all of that is relevant in that way.
And how does getting a tick-borne disease infection sort of break that balance and push someone into a situation where they no longer have healthy cells and the cells can no longer protect themselves from all of these different microbes?
Yeah, often it doesn't at all.
Okay.
When you look at all of the tick-borne microbes, whether you're talking about Borrelia, Bartonella, all of the things that you hear about, they are all low-grade pathogens. And a lot of people really raise their eyebrows and are surprised to hear me say that. But how you define as a pathogen is the ability of that bacteria, virus, whatever, to cause severe acute illness. So, Ebola is a severe pathogen. That's a high grade pathogen. Smallpox, that's a high grade pathogen. So, when you look at everything out there, SARS virus, that's a medium to low grade pathogen.
Mhm.
So the mortality associated with Ebola, about 60%. Smallpox, even higher than that. COVID, about 1%, about 1%. So killed a lot of people because it infected so many people all at one time, but the actual mortality was 1% or
Right.
less. Tick-borne microbes, pretty close to zero. Tick-borne microbes do not kill people acutely. The chronic manifestations may kill people, but they don't kill people acutely. They win by stealth. So their motive is not to make you severely ill. Their motive is to have a place in your body to hang out and wait for another host. They don't have to make you sick to do that. Very interestingly, when I was researching my book Unlocking Lyme, I came upon evidence that a person, a human, thawed out of a glacier in the Italian Alps that was 5,300 years old. Mid to late 40s, had some arthritis, wasn't in perfect health, but this guy was crossing the Alps. He had Borrelia, the Lyme microbe, in his tissues. This
Yeah.
guy was crossing the Alps. And that just shows what happens with in a lot of cases, that these things can enter the body, and they do it very stealthily. They bypass the immune system. Its immune system mops up a lot of the microbes, but a few get through. And if they can enter tissues and enter cells, they can become dormant inside cells and just kind of hang out and wait. And when our health is compromised in other ways, that's when we become sick. That's when these things reactivate. But it's typically not just Borrelia, not just Bartonella. It's Epstein-Barr virus and all the things that we know to measure, and 10 times over that, maybe even 100 times over that. So we do have these microbes that, that science is showing more and more. We have these things that are dormant in our tissues. Tick-borne microbes can become dormant in our tissues. And it's not until we do that other things happen. I've interviewed thousands of people over the past decade, and 95% of the people that I talk to do not remember becoming ill around the time of a tick bite.
Yeah. I use the
And
analogy a lot of times with my patients where it's like, it's the straws on the back of the camel, right? And the camel
yep,
is the immune system. And it's like, there's finally just too much of an overload. And that's when you have this huge change.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so it's other factors, years of a bad diet, sometimes a perfect storm of stress factors, of mental stress. My wife left me, my office, I
Mhm.
got fired from my job, my house burned down, and that happened all at once. Or I had a bad automobile accident and ended up in the hospital recovering for 2 or 3 months. Those kinds of stresses seem to precipitate reactivation of these microbes. And then, what the microbes are doing when they reactivate is they want to create a food supply. So they start breaking down, the things that you talk about. They use enzymes and inflammatory cytokines from the immune systems break down our tissues, our cells, and to create a food source to grow more microbes. And when that starts happening, it's like a pot boiling over that just feeds itself. And that can affect everything in the body, including that gut microbiome and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, there's a lot of things when you're trying to treat these infections that can cause further disruption of the microbiome all over the body. Would you like to comment on that a little bit?
Well, there's that delicate balance of the gut that is so important. Everybody talks about the immune system, but we actually have 4 levels of defense. And it's really important to recognize all 4. So the first level of defense is barriers, the gut lining, the skin, the lining of our sinuses. And what those things are designed to do is keep microbes out of our tissues. But those barriers are leaky. Things are constantly big making their way across these barriers and getting to our bloodstream. So our backup system, and it's really most important for acute infections, is our immune system that's managing these things that are sometimes a trickle, sometimes a flood of not only things that are part of us from our gut and our skin and our sinuses, but also respiratory infections and tick-borne microbes and everything else. So our immune system is the backup plan. So that's a second level of defense. Our third level of defense is our cells. A lot of people don't appreciate that our cells, brain cells, heart cells, all the cells in our body have the ability to expel or destroy microbes. And they use a process that's called autophagy that the cell uses to rebuild itself. Well, it's also how it gets rid of microbes. So our cells can defend themselves, but all microbes, and this is a really fascinating thing to study, all microbes they're finding have the ability to become dormant. If conditions aren't favorable for the microbe to grow, then it just goes into a quiescent, dormant state. And it can stay like that indefinitely. If you look at all the microbe mass of all microbes on Earth, 60% of them are dormant at any given time. So that dormancy is a key thing that microbes use. And you have to think about it that, a bacteria is like 100 to 1,000 times smaller than one of our cells. And a virus is a whole lot smaller than that. So you can have a bunch of microbes, a bunch of bacteria inside your cells, but if they're dormant, the cell just keeps right on working. So, so that fourth level, third level is our cellular defense, And then the fourth is our normal flora. So we have bacteria in our gut, on our skin, other places in the body that protect us from pathogens. So we all have these opportunists that are there just waiting to digest us, to cross into our bloodstream, everything else. And our normal flora keep them in check by secreting substances that suppress growth of these other microbes. They don't do it for us. They do it because they want all the food to themselves in the gut or on the skin or anywhere else. So they're suppressing their competition. And it just works with for us. We've had this long-standing relationship with them, and it's kind of like, okay, yeah, we're going to let you hang out there because you're doing us a favor. And so our immune system doesn't attack them. So it's a really interesting balance, but they're easily disrupted. Antibiotics, stress, there's so many factors that can disrupt that gut microbiome. And once you do that, you lose that defense. So an interesting study that I came upon, this was a study in 2015, is that they found that we do have a trickle of microbes, of bacteria, pathogens, and normal flora too that flow across the gut barrier into the bloodstream. And this is happening all the time to everybody. When you have dysbiosis, when you disrupt the balance of normal flora versus pathogens in the gut, that trickle becomes a flood of pathogens. So that's one way that that treatments of Lyme disease, if you're not careful, can actually disrupt the gut and aggravate your situation, because then not only have you got reactivation of the Lyme microbes and all the other things that you've got picked up in your tissues, you got this flood of pathogens coming in from the gut and layering on top of that. So yeah, you have to be really careful about not disrupting that gut balance, or the gut, skin, any, these microbiomes that exist outside of our tissues.
Right. So it's a really delicate balance because it's a double-edged sword, right? How do you get rid of an infection without using means that disrupt the microbiome? And not only the microbiome and the normal flora that helps to protect us, as you just explained, but also that can exacerbate the breakdown of the tight junctions, for example, in the gut, and then allow all of these toxins and pathogens to actually enter into systemic circulation,
Yeah.
causing more toxicity, oxidative stress, et cetera. And it just seems like a vicious cycle that starts feeding itself.
Yeah, it does. And yeah, that's why you have to be really careful about using antibiotics. And I think there is a place for antibiotics and Lyme therapy, but I think it has to be really used very judiciously. When we get right down to it, antibiotics do a what they're designed for are to kill fast growing pathogens, things that are growing really fast. So somebody gets an acute pneumococcal pneumonia, those bacteria are invading the lung tissue and they're growing very fast. Their doubling time is roughly about 15 or 20 minutes. So they're moving.
Mm,
And antibiotics depend on that fast growth to kill those bacteria selectively. It's not that they like to, that we can target pneumococcal bacteria. What we're targeting with an antibiotic is fast growing bacteria. All right. So, and they're growing a lot faster than normal flora, but still, with prolonged use of an antibiotic, you're going to start killing your normal flora too. They're kind of medium growth. They're not turning over as rapidly. So let's look at what's the doubling time of Borrelia, the Lyme microbe? 12 to 24 hours. 12 to 24 hours. And then if it's dormant inside a cell, you're not going to get it at all. So that presents a real problem with using antibiotics because to kill those bacteria, you're going to have to use those antibiotics for months on end. Whatever therapy you're going to have to do, you're going to have to do it for months on end to get rid of that bacteria. And you always run into the problem, two basic problems. You're going to disrupt normal flora, which are going to allow pathogens to flourish in the gut, and you're going to create antibiotic resistance in those pathogens in the gut.
Right.
And so you kind of get a double whammy, and that limits the use of antibiotics. I think what everybody focuses on when they're trying to solve the problem of Lyme disease is, how do I kill the microbe that's making me sick? How do I kill that bacteria that's making me sick? I have to find the bacteria and kill that bacteria so I can get well. And the
Right.
first thing they turn to is what they know, which is antibiotics, but it's not a good choice. It's not a solution that fits the problem. So first of all, there's always a lot more there than we can test for when you look at this bigger tissue microbiome. And second, they're all growing really, really slowly. So one thing that I'd like to emphasize is it's not about the microbes. It's about restoring the ability of the body to contain the microbes. And part of that is suppressing this overgrowth of bacteria and other microbes that are reactivating in your system, that thing that's shifting your body toward breaking down your tissues to create an environment that favors microbe growth. But you have to restore the ability of the body to contain that thing, and that's really important.
Yeah, I think that's a vital point in all of this. So I'm going to pause for a second here. Before we conclude this complimentary part of the interview, I want to give you the opportunity to let patients know where they can find you and what you have going on. So if you have any upcoming events, and then we're going to get back to this discussion and we're going to dive much, much deeper. And I want to hear from you, really how you think we should tackle this problem. So
Uh,
go ahead and tell everyone that's listening where they can find you and how they can find you.
All right. Well, very good. Thank you. Best way to find me is through the website vitalland. I'm medical director for that company. And that's where I do most of my work as far as the content I put out. We build supplement protocols, but also educational programs for people. I also have a new book out called The Cellular Wellness Solution that you can get it at any bookseller too. But those are the main places.
Okay, wonderful. So back to our conversation. How would you tackle this? How do you tackle this?
Well, that's a real beauty of herbs. So back to what I was saying, that our goal is to restore the ability of the body to take care of itself and keep those microbes contained. The ones in our tissues that are being reactivated, not just tick-borne microbes, but everything else. I mean, think of all the people that are tested and they find Epstein-Barr virus and
Mhm.
mycoplasmas and chlamydias and all these other bacteria. They didn't get those from ticks. They picked those up as kids. They've been dormant in their tissues, just like the tick-borne microbes, and they become reactivated when everything else does. But it's well beyond our ability to test. I mean, it's the spectrum of it is really pretty mind-boggling. So, how do we go about doing that? And it's part of it is suppressing the microbes, but how do you do that without disrupting the gut flora and what's going on in the gut and really making a mess there? Because, so many people already have compromised gut function just from the stress of chronic Lyme disease. That may be aggravated by years of poor diet and everything else, but so it's a big deal. What I found to be the answer is herbal therapy. It just really, really makes a difference. And more evidence is pointing to that. All plants have antimicrobial properties. They have to. Every living organism has to have antimicrobial properties. And that's even including bacteria have to defend themselves from other bacteria. funguses have to defend themselves from bacteria and viruses, and plants do too. We have a cellular immune system that was part of our evolution. Plants use a biochemical system to solve that problem. So essentially, plants' immune system is a very sophisticated biochemical system. And that system is designed to protect the plant's cells from invasive viruses, bacteria, protozoa, yeast, virtually everything, because plants are having a lot of the same threats that we are. Some plants are particularly good antimicrobials, and it really depends on the microbe stress that's present in that plant's natural environment, how robust a system it's building. So we know that a lot of herbs have really good antimicrobial properties. And that's been my interest in just looking at this thing and how we can evaluate this system for Lyme disease. But the key thing about herbs is it's not a single chemical like an antibiotic. It's a spectrum, this robust spectrum of hundreds or even thousands of chemicals that are affecting microbes not one way, but in dozens of different ways that are suppressive. So it's a really interesting system. But like our immune system is selective for pathogens but spares our normal flora, right?
Right.
Plants do the same thing. That system affects pathogens but doesn't affect normal flora. And that's actually been documented in scientific studies, which is really fascinating. It's something that I observed throughout my whole recovery. Antibiotics would wreck my gut in 2 weeks. And I started taking these really potent herbs thinking, well, I might get 2 weeks out of it. Good luck. But that didn't happen. My gut actually improved the whole time I was taking herbs. And I was like, wow, this is pretty fascinating.
Mm.
And years later, after observing this in so many people, I actually found somebody took the time to document it in a study. But they don't disrupt normal flora, and antibiotic resistance or resistant bacteria is unknown with herbs. It doesn't occur in the same way that it occurs with an antibiotic. So we've knocked down those two problems. So that opens us up to consider, well, maybe this is something that we could use for months or years to suppress these things. But the really great thing is, it's not just the antimicrobial properties you get. The herbs are also protecting cells of the body throughout the body. And they are protecting cells from free radicals, toxic substances, virtually every stress you can think of. At the same time, a lot of our herbs are immune modulators. They're balancing immune function. So they're reducing those inflammatory cytokines that the microbes are using to drive tissue destruction. And at the same time, they're blocking enzymes that are affecting our cells and affecting the ability of microbes to invade our cells. So the herbs are doing all these wonderful things all at one time. And that allows us to use them as this foundation of therapy to do what we need to do. And again, at the same time, they're suppressing pathogens in a gut and allowing our normal flora to recover, which is exactly what we need with all this stress. They also reduce our stress hormones. And, it's just really fascinating to see all the ways these things work.
It is, it's amazing, and I love how all of the different constituents in the herbs work synergistically, right? So, not only are you not having side effects, but you're having side benefits, which is just wonderful. I love this conversation so much.
It is a lot of fun. I like to think about it like if you went to see a symphony, you're going to go hear the Christmas pops, and you walk in and there's one violin. And that would be nice.
Yeah.
I'm sure the music would be beautiful if the musician was talented, but you add in the other strings and the brass and all the other parts of the orchestra, and you have this sound that's just so much more than each of the individual instruments. And I think of herbs in the same way. That synergy is each of the herbs benefits are enhancing the benefits of the other herbs. So when you combine them, you just get these wonderful effects.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the great thing is that when you're using herbals, I look at it as you're rebuilding the body, right? You're restoring function to systems, you're restoring health, you're fixing, the immune system and helping the patient to heal while you're using the various antimicrobial actions of some of the same exact herbs to slowly shrink that infectious load. And it's kind of like the infectious load is going down while the quality and the health and the functionality of the patient is going up, and then in the end, once you've restored their health and balance, their body can actually hold all of those infections that you've been talking about kind of in remission, put them back into their dormancy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It is really cool to see how nature works. And it's just so far beyond what we are technically capable of. It's I just think it's so important for people to consider, that boost from natural therapy. I mean, there's so many other things that have value that you can do, but building that foundation with herbal therapy and other natural therapies, I just think is exceedingly important to really get where you want to go.
Yeah, I do too. Anything, if you had to, give one piece of advice to patients that are listening, what would it be?
Yeah, it's that same thing. Don't focus on killing the microbe as much as restoring your body's ability to keep all of your microbes in check in that internal tissue and blood microbiome that we're going to be hearing more and more about. Um, that's so important. And one of the most important things that I think you can do right up front is starting to take a really good regimen of herbs. And there's so many herbs that we have so much evidence for right now, and it's really important. And beyond that, just doing the things that you need to do to restore your health, a healthy diet, low stress, getting enough sleep, all of these things are so remarkably important. They're not easy. Taking the herbs comparatively is really pretty darn easy. But the more you're doing, and I think building that foundation is so important. I see so many people, and I get it. You get desperate. Nobody likes to be sick. Nobody likes symptoms, and you just want to go somewhere and say, "Hit me with something that's going to make me well." I get it, but so many people miss those obvious things that they need to be doing that are so important, and they go directly to invasive and often expensive therapies that just sometimes come back and actually make their situation worse.
Yeah, with chronic tick-borne disease, I would say it's one of the few diseases or conditions where like there is no magic pill. There's no magic pill that's just going to make the pain go away. There's no magic pill that's just going to fix the brain fog or your heart palpitations or your thyroid issues or your depression and anxiety or insomnia or, fill in the blank, right? Because it affects every single cell and system in the body.
Yep.
Um, and I think we could all learn a lot from these infections, right? A lot about like our bodies and what our bodies need to heal because there isn't any simple solution when it comes to Lyme disease. It's like you've got to almost be in it for the long haul and be willing to make these lifestyle changes and change your nutrition, change your outlook. There's so many things, and then that in conjunction with using all of these wonderful herbs just really helps someone to get like on their healing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those things are always important. But it's interesting. I would say at this point in my journey, I would confidently say that if you understand what's driving chronic Lyme disease, you fundamentally understand what's driving every chronic illness. It's fundamentally the same thing. Different microbes, slightly different stress factors, but that's what's driving illness. And what we're not doing in our conventional system for chronic illness is addressing the underlying causes that are driving the illness. We're just chasing the symptoms. And that's why people don't get well. So, my stepping point is to say, okay, let's take everything that we've learned with Lyme disease and let's start applying it everywhere else. Because if we do these things, we can start getting a handle on all of chronic illness.
Yeah. I'm excited. I haven't read your book, but I am going to now. And, I think you and I had a conversation a while ago, and the takeaway that I walked away from that was thinking, I wonder if someday we're going to realize that almost every condition is caused by some sort of microbe in the body. Everything from all of our mental issues to physical issues, some virus, bacteria, fungus, some microbe, right? That's changing our biochemistry and driving it.
We are much closer to that than you might know. I've been following the world's literature for years, the scientific literature, and it's those connections are there, but they're being ignored by conventional medicine predominantly because they don't have anything to treat it. They don't have any tools to treat it. Antibiotics don't work, drugs don't work. And if you don't have tools to treat something, I mean, this is the big deal with chronic Lyme disease. This is why doctors don't want to mess with it because they don't understand it and they don't have anything to treat it with. And when you are confronted with something like that, you just want it to go away.
Yeah.
And so again, we understand chronic Lyme, yes. And yeah, so when you look at Borrelia, the microbe associated with Lyme disease, it's been connected to dementia, Parkinson's, breast cancer, virtually everything. But expand outside of that and look at these other things that we're calling co-infections. Bartonella has been found in various kinds of cancer cells. Babesia shows up in odd places. Chlamydia, mycoplasma, Epstein-Barr, and these are just the ones that we know about that we're commonly testing for. So what I'm finding is there's a whole lot more. And what we don't understand is the full scope of all the microbes that can potentially be in our tissues in a dormant state, and the possibility that some of those things are actually symbiotic and they actually may be important for our cells to work properly. So there's still a lot we have to learn, but those connections to chronic illness. 20% of cancers are now absolutely connected with a microbe. I think sooner or later that will be 100%. They have been able to, it was an interesting experiment that they took an algae, which has eukaryotic cells, cells like ours, and they were trying to define what causes cancer. So they exposed this algae to all kinds of carcinogens and all these toxic chemicals and stuff. And the algae just died every time. No cancer, just died. But then they took the algae and put it in a closet so it wasn't getting sunlight. That stressed the cells. And then they exposed it to an intracellular bacteria that's common in that algae, that exists in that algae even when the algae is in a healthy state. But they exposed the stressed cells, the stressed algae cells to that bacteria, turned to cancer every single time. And what they found was that the bacteria was inserting its gene for unregulated growth into the genome of the cancer and causing it to have unregulated or unrestricted growth. So you think about it, that's the connection. All of our cells have restricted growth. When you look at a heart cell or a brain cell, you can't have that thing just dividing randomly. It has to be in a very, very restricted controlled growth that's defined by the genetic program inside the cell. All bacteria have unrestricted growth. So long as there's food's present, they'll keep right on growing. Throw them in a petri dish full of food, they'll eat all the food, and they keep growing at the expense of all life around them. So the fact that when our cells become cancerous, they take on unrestricted growth like a bacteria, and then you start looking at all these microbe connections, you can't not think that there has to be a microbe connection. And then you look at all the different tumors and cancers that they started finding intracellular bacteria, including Borrelia, but a whole lot of others inside cells. Even there was one study that was talking about different tumors have different intracellular microbiomes. So, yeah, it's pretty fascinating. But the herbs, they can protect you. All herbs have anti-cancer properties. Every herb that I've studied, somebody's looked at it and found anti-cancer properties, along with antimicrobial properties. So definitely something we should be paying attention to.
I could not agree more. You're speaking my language. Thank you so much for joining us. Once again, would you please tell the audience where they can find you and about your books and anything else that you would like to leave us with?
Yes, again, I'm medical director for a company called Vital Plan that you can find me and information about me at Vital Plan, VITALPLAN.com. And yeah, and my latest book, The Cellular Wellness Solution. Thank you
Awesome.
for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. And thank all of you at home for watching. We'll be back soon.
Oh, it's a pleasure.